Hi, Internet students. Welcome to class with Professor Mead. Today we're going to talk about sex and housework. Let's get started with the think, pair, share. So the first thing we need to know, right, what's in general is this article about? What are 5 things that you need to know to understand why our sex lives are complicated and connected to things like housework? How are egalitarian relationships good and bad? This is me trying to get you to look at things from a non-biased, non-value ridden perspective, right? So you want to look at, if you believe egalitarian relationships are good, you don't want to only look at the positives of them. You also want to look at the negatives. If you think that egalitarian relationships are not good or not in the best interest of a couple, then you still want to look at what is positive and what are the negative consequences of different styles of relationships, like the traditional marriage or the patriarchal marriage. And then the real question that people like to have answered is, do men who do less housework have more sex, or do men who do less housework have more sex? According to psychotherapist Lori Gottlieb, you should avoid chores if you want more sex, men. That both men and women in traditional marriages are reporting having better sex lives and having sex more often, while people in more egalitarian relationships are reporting having less sex and more mediocre, uninteresting sex lives. That there is a correlation between housework and sexual frequency, but it's not as simple as that. Just like anything else with people, the topic is a lot more complicated than you would originally think. You know, while it's easy to say, put down your vacuums, gentlemen, if you want to get laid, in a news article title, the research itself is much more complicated and the topic is much more complicated than that. For example, as discussed in this article, there's actually 2 research articles that use the same data, and they came up with very different results. Now, the methods for these articles, they both had the same data, 6,800 interviews with couples, and they did those interviews in the 1990s. While Gottlieb found that men who did less housework had more sex, she actually looked at the kind of housework that men did and then labeled it either masculine or feminine. While Geiger, who did another study with the same data, looked at that data and came up with a different conclusion because she looked at men's total housework hours, and she found that in fact men who did more housework in total actually had more sex. But why do we hear the discrepancies between couples, and why are things a little more complicated than just how much housework you do or don't do? One of the things is, you know, the modern era. We work more and more and more. We make less per hour. Many people don't make a living wage anymore. You can't support a household on one income. And people are overworked, overstressed, and they just don't feel like they have the time and energy to devote to their partner and to sex like they might have if they could work overall fewer hours and still have a living wage. Couples still say that sharing household chores is very important to them. And people who are in egalitarian relationships tend to get along better. What she was calling kindred spirits, make for great relationships, but not as great sex. The sex tends to be more boring, as reported by the couples. Let me kind of explain this. If you get along with somebody, if you compromise with somebody, if you feel safe with somebody, you're not going to have the unpredictability, the anger, passion. You might have more fun in a marriage that's unequal, in terms of sex, but it doesn't make for a better partner in terms of, friendship and getting along. If you don't completely trust somebody and things are unexpected, that is going to be much more exciting than if things are as they are expected and nothing is ever, and people don't go too far out of the boundaries in either way. In addition to that, for all couples overall, 1 in 5 marriages is deemed as sexless. So sexless is a marriage that has sex about 10 times a year, which is a little bit less than once a month. So the data for both of these studies that came out of the 90s, everybody's saying sharing household chores is important, right? In the 90s, about 47% of couples said that. Today, it's about 72% of couples. And some of the more recent research have linked, there's a correlation, in other words, between fathers who share housework and fathers' feelings of warmth towards their wives. In other words, men who share more housework have more fond feelings for their spouse. In addition to that, men have tripled the amount of time that they spend with children. In the 50s and 60s traditional marriages, men did very little child care. In other words, cooking specifically for children, giving them baths, getting them ready for bed, or getting them up in the morning, taking them to school, those kinds of things. Men have tripled the amount of time that they spend with children. Today, men are more likely to do those activities. So even if they don't do as many household chores, which they don't, they haven't increased as much in their share of household chores as they have time spent with children or within childcare. Progress, though. One of the things that they talk about is that we should get rid of outdated sexual scripts, right? So this idea, right, why the news media in this article, they thought it was great. They wanted to run with the title of men who do less housework have more sex, right? The alternative to that is to instead be okay with and accepting of women's sexuality, meaning it's okay for women to want sex, to enjoy sex, and to initiate sex. So if we focused less on how men could get more sex and less on giving women sexual freedom to be sexual beings, everybody is likely to be having more sex. Okay, quick review. What's the article say about having more sex? That one's complicated, right? What are the 5 things you need to know to understand why sex lives are complicated? Why are egalitarian relationships good and bad? Do men need to do less housework to have more sex, or do men need to do more housework to have more sex? What is your opinion on that? And then the workshop, Digging Deeper. So this isn't a workshop that you guys do, but I just want to point out, these are the kind of activities that I do in class. So some of you are kind of doing, some of you in the classes will be doing, something similar, interviews with somebody that either in your household or somebody through class, to get their opinions, and you'll be writing your own questions. This is the same thing we would essentially do in class. We would sit in class in our groups and come up with our survey questions together, and then they would all go out and interview 3 people each. So you can see that I work really hard to try to bring the dynamics of the activities we do in class online. Not that it's easy or that it always works, but I just want to kind of show you where things come from. And as I've been doing, I'm going to sign off today as your reluctant YouTube professor. I love being a professor, but I'm quite reluctant about being a YouTuber. Have a great day.